Now, Professor Said Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran is the doyen of commentators on all matters Iranian and indeed much further afield increasingly. They're lucky to have him. We are even luckier to have him as a regular guest on our show. Professor, wonderful to see you again. You may have heard, perhaps not, I struck a slightly optimistic note in my analysis of where we are now on the American-Iranian talks. Are you optimistic?
I think I should be cautious, although your logic is, I think, very strong. But the problem, of course, is that the United States is not the political order in the United States is not the most logical or reasonable, and the Israeli regime is a genocidal regime. So it's really hard to say. It is a positive sign that the United States backed down, at least in private, in order to get the Iranians to come to the negotiating table again. We had the fifth round of talks, and the Iranians, although they went in late a bit, I think, to send a message to the Americans, but the fact that they did participate was because the United States sent a message through the Omani government, basically saying that their public stance is different from their private stance. But I think the most important issue is what you alluded to, and that is that Iran is a missile and drone superpower. And I think the Russians will attest to that. If there is a strike against Iran by the Israeli regime, Iran will launch a major strike, which will be far, far more effective than what was called True Promise 2. In fact, Iran owes the Israeli regime a True Promise 3, and this would, I think, give an excuse for the Iranians to go much further than what they were thinking of doing for True Promise 3. So it would be a foolish move by the Israeli regime. They will not be able to do it without the Americans. Last time when the regime attacked Iran, and it wasn't a very effective attack, but they used the United States supported them by using their bases in Turkey, in Qatar, in the Emirates, in Bahrain, their radar installations. They helped Israeli jets refuel. Without the United States, it's impossible for the regime to carry out any sort of effective strike. Of course, this also shows how sadly countries in our region are complicit in what the United States, what the Israelis have done in the past. Whenever the Iranians struck the Israeli regime, these same radar installations in Turkey and in the Persian Gulf region were used to help Israel, the Israeli regime. And I assume that the same will happen in future.
And if it does, of course, Iran has made clear that anywhere from which this attack originates or is facilitated will be regarded as legitimate targets for Iranian countermeasures.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. The Persian Gulf region is full of American bases. And these are all glass castles and glass mansions that can be destroyed very easily. I would imagine that if the Americans were to actually strike Iran at some point, they would have to do it from Diego Garcia. And that would be a 5,000-kilometer flight. And they would have to fly over Iran. And I would guess that these planes, some of them will be shot down. And of course, the Iranian counterstrike will be massive. Wherever there are American bases, they would be seen as legitimate targets, or American interests that are not in bases. But if attacks are carried out from Qatar, from the Emirates, or anywhere else in the region, those countries will be seen as hostile, the entire country. So I find it very unlikely that they will allow those bases to be used directly. But one important point is that if the Israeli regime attacks, I think that the Iranian counterstrike would be decisive. And the Iranians, over the past few months, have been preparing themselves for an American or an attack by the United States or by the Israeli regime. They've been improving their air defenses. massively, and they've been preparing their missile and drone capabilities for greater precision and greater accuracy. I think it will be devastating for the Israeli regime if they carry out an attack. So I agree with your logic. I was listening to you before I came on. I think you're absolutely correct. The only thing that stands in the way of your logic is the fact that the Americans, the empire, the Israeli regime have nothing to do with logic usually.
Now, I made the point, I'm sure you're aware of it, even from Tehran, but here in the West, it's patently obvious from statements being made in Canada, in the United Kingdom, elsewhere on the mainland of Europe, by politicians and by publications and broadcasters that have clung ferociously, even Piers Morgan, clung ferociously to being shills for Netanyahu's slaughter of the innocents, of the firstborn or even unborn. They have now done a 180 and are now, in some cases, Bono, for example, who hasn't said one cheep in the whole of this affair, are calling for Netanyahu to go, for Israel to be freed from Netanyahu's grip. And in Piers Morgan's case, he has, in his own words, turned on the Israeli government and acknowledged that in all those shouting matches he had with thee and me, he was wrong. Now, there's greater rejoicing, as you know, in heaven when a sinner doth repent than the 99% who hath no need of repentance. So on one level, we should congratulate each other on the role we've played in bringing about this change of heart. But what do you think really lies behind it? And what does it portend for Netanyahu?
I'm not sure how long this change of heart will last. We'll see about that. But I think the reason for all this change is not because any of these people have suddenly discovered religion or they've seen the light. It's because that the public has turned against the Israeli regime. People are waking up, despite the fact that they are shutting down Instagram accounts, as I think your next guest will explain, not just because they're shutting down Facebook accounts. I mean, they are shutting down Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts, and they are, in my case, I'm sure, on Twitter, they are massively trying to suppress voices that support the Palestinian people. But despite all that, people are much more awake than before. I am in Venezuela right now, and there's for the local elections, and there's a host of young people here from different parts of the world who are monitoring the elections. They're observing the elections. And when you speak to these young people, George, from all over the world, it's so encouraging. It's like when I speak with them, I have nothing to add. They know much more than me. They're so eloquent in the way in which they speak. The world has changed. There's such an awakening, and so many young, sophisticated speakers and thinkers are now active that the establishment has to make some sort of change. But even if Netanyahu is removed, nothing really changes in Palestine. They want to escape. They want to prepare the ground so that when Netanyahu is ultimately removed, they can say all is well now. It's like saying Nazi Germany without Adolf Hitler is fine, or that ISIS without Abu Bakr Baghdadi is normal, or Al Qaeda without Jolani is a normal and regular and legitimate organization. With or without Netanyahu, the Israeli regime is a genocidal regime. And the polls that you were referring to show that very clearly. It is not, the liberals in the Israeli regime are very different from the radical religious Zionists. But when it comes to seeing the Palestinian people as subhuman, when it comes to seeing them as Amalek, the majority of these people as well view the Palestinians just like their adversaries within the broader Zionist society in Palestine.
Now, Professor, I alluded earlier to the breadth of your analytical purview, which has spread now far beyond the Persian Gulf issues. So let me turn you, if I may, to what's happening in Ukraine. It's still a very high stakes business. President Putin might well have been assassinated today in a helicopter, as it happens. A drone attacked his helicopter. It was shot down, but imagine, God forbid, if it had not been shot down and the president of Russia was now no longer with us. The blizzard attack on all parts, actually, of Western Ukraine last evening followed in retaliation to a blizzard of drone attacks on Russian territory from Ukraine. It's still very, very dangerous. But it does look pretty much to me like Donald Trump has made a decision that this is not his war and that this war needs to be blamed on whomsoever it was that was operating the auto pen in the last couple of years of Joe Biden's presidency. Does it look that way to you?
Yes, I think you're absolutely correct, although you're much more of an expert than I. It was very clear from day one when the war started that NATO would lose. And despite all the propaganda, it was obvious that that Ukraine was going to be sacrificed and destroyed. And they pretended that the Russians were weak and the Russians were vulnerable, and they were taking apart washing machines to use the chips to make missiles. Well, we saw what happened last night, and how many drones and missiles are being used against Ukraine. And it's clear that the propaganda machine from day one was churning out nonsense. But in doing so, they've caused the slaughter of 1 million men in Ukraine for nothing. Nothing except for the fact that these wealthy elites in the United States, directly or indirectly, receive their wealth from the military-industrial complex. It's just like Afghanistan. Nothing has changed. You know better than I that Carter and Brzezinski, they cooked the plan to help these so-called mujahideen so that the Soviets would invade Afghanistan. People often think that the Soviet Union invaded and then the Americans got involved, but it's the exact opposite. The Americans started helping these extremists in order for the Soviet Union to invade so that they would have their Vietnam. In other words, they sacrificed the people of Afghanistan. And while doing that, they helped spread Wahhabism and Salafism and the terror that has destroyed so much of the region, whether in Syria, whether in Libya, whether in Afghanistan or Iraq or elsewhere. So the behavior of the US empire, the absence of morality among US elites and elites across NATO, it's the same as it was back then, and nothing is going to change in future. The only hope is that the empire will soon suffer such a defeat because it has overextended itself. It is at war with the war, whether trade wars or whether military wars or whether confrontations with Iran, for example, over the nuclear program. It has overextended itself. And I think with the horrible economic situation that we see in the United States and elsewhere may hopefully bring about a collapse of the empire and may force a change in mentality among American and Western elites. The only danger is that, as they say, drowning people grab at anything nearby. They may choose most dangerous path, and that is to lash out as they drown. But I'm optimistic about the future, and I think that by overextending itself, the empire will ultimately bring about its own demise and a better world for the rest of us.